Okay, so Bezras Hashem, tonight we're going to be continuing our series of shirim on the Torah of the Goyin and the Tzaddik, Rav Yitzchak Meyer Morgenstern Shlita, entering the Sea of Wisdom. And tonight is obviously a special night to be trying to understand and delve a little bit deeper into the waters of the Torah of the Tzaddik, primarily because Hanukkah is the time of the Torah of Tzaddikim. Yud Tes Kislev, the Hiskalis of the Balatanya, and the permission given to the Talmidim of the Baal Shem Tov HaKadosh to reveal Sisrei Torah and Pnimius HaTorah in a language that would speak to each and every individual. This is what takes place through Kislev. It's not coincidental that the Alter Rebbe was Yoitze from the Ma'asar, that he left prison in Kislev, but rather Kislev itself is what created the energy for the Balatanya to leave, because Kislev is the time of dreaming, the Sefer Yetzirah tells us. And what is Pnimius HaTorah if not the capacity to dream while a person is still awake? The ability to look at the world on one level, to see the outside of the world and the exteriority of the world, and at the same time to be able to dream and to imagine the depths that kind of exists underneath the chitzonius, underneath the externality of the world. And that's what we do in Hanukkah. We celebrate the light of Pnimius HaTorah. We celebrate that Or HaGanuz. The Bnei Yissaschar, the Rebbe quotes it numerous times, that the Bnei Yissaschar quotes three Bali Ruach HaKodesh, Rav Pinchas Karitzer, the Maggid of Mezrich, and I believe, I'm forgetting, maybe it was the Chayzim Milublin, I'm forgetting exactly who, but all of them in unison agreed that the 36 hours that the Or HaGanuz shone in the beginning of creation prior to the Chet of Adam HaRishon and its concealment is represented and reflected and refracted in the 36 candles, as well as the 36 Masechtos of Shas and the 36 candles of Hanukkah. So in Hanukkah, there's a te'ima of Pnimius HaTorah, and therefore when we try and learn the Tzaddik's Torah and be makusher to the Tzaddik, in our generation, it's very much a kiyum of the mitzvah of Halakas Ner Hanukkah as well. So what the Rebbe is talking about here is a simple nakuda, but an essential nakuda. And we have to hold in mind what the Mesilas Yesharim tells us in the Hakdama, that very often it is the most essential things that need to be repeated over and over again. Meaning to say that the human mind tends to become excited by novelty or new ideas or exciting ideas because there's a certain newness or novelty associated with spectacular ideas of Torah. And that's not lacking in the Rebbe's Torah, Avada, that's clear as day everywhere in the Rebbe's Torah. But there's also an element where there has to be the pashtus of the Torah. And the pashtus of the Torah, in spite of the fact that it appears to be known to us already, that it appears to be something obvious, and it's axiomatic already within our conception of relationship to God and ourselves and the world, nevertheless, we have to be reminded about the simplest elements of Pnimius HaTorah so that we can start afresh and we can renew ourselves and throw ourselves with ferocity into the things that we know but we've forgotten. We know them but we've forgotten them because we know them so deeply that we forget that we have access to them. And what the Rebbe is being makdim with is the question as to why it is that we know that the halachos of Hanukkah follow the halachos of Beis Hillel. But derech klal, we follow the halachos of Beis Hillel in relationship to Beis Shammai, primarily, as the Meforshim point out, that Beis Shammai was more machmir. Beis Shammai was associated with a certain element of severity or a left-mindedness, as the Vilna Gaon points out, a deep association with limitation, constriction, concealment, and all of those elements associated with intensity. And Beis Hillel, on the other hand, represents chesed. It represents a willingness to be mekil, to find kulos, to make life just a little bit simpler, taking into consideration the human element of halachic observance and what it means to live in this world. And we know that the tzaddikim point out that la'asid lavo, the halacha, is going to be like Beis Shammai. Because in truth, la'asid lavo, even the gevuros are going to be masapich into chasadim. Even that which appears to be severe or strict is going to be revealed to, in truth, have been an expression of a loving kindness of HaKadosh Baruch Hu that couldn't be received fully in our present exile-oriented mind state. And so what the Rebbe is pointing out is that not only do we follow the halacha of Beis Hillel when it comes to lighting the menorah, which is on the first night we light one candle, on the second night we light a second candle, and a third and a fourth, and so on and so forth until we've lit all the candles. Like Beis Hillel tells us, moisif v'hoilech, that we move by adding. Not only is it coincidental that we follow Beis Hillel's halacha, but rather the entire essence of Hanukkah is associated with the or of Beis Hillel, and therefore we paskin like Beis Hillel on Hanukkah. It's not just that we happen to follow Beis Hillel, but rather there's an essential connection between the or of Beis Hillel and the or of Hanukkah, which the Rebbe quotes from different tzaddikim that Hanukkah, the letters of Hanukkah, is Roshei Tevos Ches Neiros v'Halacha Beis Hillel, that it's 8 candles and the halacha is like Beis Hillel, highlighting that it's not simply a symptom of Hanukkah that we paskin like Beis Hillel, but rather it's constitutive and fundamental and essential to the very nature of Hanukkah is that we paskin like Beis Hillel. And the Rebbe wants to ask the question as to why it is. And on a simple but important level, we have to understand as follows. There were 2 ways of approaching Avodas Hashem. There were 2 ways of approaching the fundamental pasuk that describes the entryway into Avodas Hashem. That pasuk is Sur Meira ve'aseh tov. Turn away from negative, turn away from evil, and do good. Now, typically speaking, prior to the light of the Baal Shem Tov HaKadosh, prior to the light of Pnimiyas HaTorah being revealed as it was revealed in the light of Kislev, so Sur Meira ve'aseh tov were 2 steps in an essential process. First and foremost, like the Bali Musar would tell us, or even like the Rishonim would tell us, a person has to spend every waking hour of their life, every ounce of their spiritual and physical energy to remove themselves from the negative, to extricate and unfetter themselves from the stuckness that they find themselves in this worldly experience with our taivos and our kina and our taiva and our kavod, or whether it's achila, whether it's inyane re'iyah, whatever it is that a person is stuck in, we had to focus al musar to fight against that negative tendency, to extricate ourselves and never look towards the aseh tov until we have properly taken care of the Sur Meira. That was the guiding principle until the Baal Shem Tov HaKadosh and his Talmidim were revealed in the world, which was not really only about the Baal Shem Tov, but it was a time that HaKadosh Baruch Hu allowed for this type of teaching of Pnimiyas HaTorah to come into the world. This is why we find that prior to the Baal Shem Tov HaKadosh, the Tikkunei Tshuva, the ways of rectification, the ways of return that a Jew had to be oisek in, were very intense. There was sigufin, there was self-flagellation, there was fasting, there was Tshuvas HaMishkal, there was an element of suffering for the sake of returning to HaKadosh Baruch Hu, of punishing the body for the sake of elevating the spirit and the soul. And we see this, and then the Chidah and different tzaddikim bring down that all of that was very true up until the Baal Shem Tov. That until the Baal Shem Tov, Sur Meira, the Aseh Tov meant that you had to leave negativity. You had to make clear that you were no longer associated with anything dark or destructive in your life. And only after you clarified yourself completely could you go on and then do good. But Zak the Baal Shem Tov and Zak the Talmidim of the Baal Shem Tov, which is a Giloy of the Torah of the Baal Shem Tov, as the Veledniker and the different tzaddikim point out, that we have a new interpretation of Sur Meira ve'aseh tov. Sur Meira doesn't mean extricate and unfetter yourself and detox yourself from all of negativity. Obviously, a person has to try and do such a thing in every moment of their lives. But in the end of the day, if we wait until we're Sur Meira, if we wait until we're removed from bad completely, then we'll never ever have the ability to be Aseh Tov, because we'll spend our entire lives in Tshuva. Because who can say that they have purified their hearts enough to be at a level of Aseh Tov? But rather, Sur Meira means ignore the Ra. Repress it, suppress it, ignore it, pretend it doesn't exist bichlal. Look beyond it, don't pay attention to it, and go straight to Aseh Tov. Go away from the negativity and throw yourself deeply and directly into the positive. And Memela, by shining the light of the positive, slowly but surely the Midos Ra'os and the activities that we want to refrain from will fall away. And yes, this is not a statement that says, a person doesn't have to continue working on Sur Meira, but a person doesn't have to be crazy anymore. A person is able to ignore the negativity and go straight into the light. And this avoida of being makdim, of beginning with the positive and then Memela letting the negative go away, is the light of Hanukkah, and that's the light of Beis Hillel, because the light of Beis Hillel is the recognition that Moisif v'hoilech, if a person wants to learn how to move forward in Avodas Hashem, it has to be in the concept of Moisif v'hoilech. I have to add more and more every moment. I have to just move forward. L'chatchila aribar. I can't pay attention to the manios or the roadblocks that hold me back from my sense of self, but rather I have to pile on through to the other side and break on through to the other side to just move into the light while ignoring the negative. And that is the light of Hanukkah. The light of Hanukkah is the capacity to illuminate the darkness, not to get rid of the darkness, but rather to illuminate the darkness itself. And this is very much associated with the halachos of Beis Hillel. of that mahalach of Beis Hillel that says Moisif v'hoilach, just go further, move forward, take more upon yourself without paying too much attention to the negativity. And this is what the Rebbe says as follows. Hizkir Marenu Hamuva Basarim Hakadoshim Dechanaka Hurosh Tevos Ches Neros V'Halacha K'Beis Hillel. That the Rebbe Ravitchemeyer brought down the remez from the Svarim that Chanukah is Rosh Tevos Ches Neros V'Halacha K'Beis Hillel. Again, reminding us that there's an essential connection between the or of Beis Hillel and the or of Chanukah. That one of the ways that this is explained is that the path of Beis Hillel, whose hoylech lekula, is like the path of the students of the Baal Shem Tov HaKadosh. For they said, Sha'amru sur meirahu al yedei aseh tov. You want to know how to move away from negative? It's through doing good. It's not sur meira, remove yourself from the negative and then do good. If you want to remove yourself from the negative, go and do good. Famous story with the Zidichaver Tzaddik, Rav Tzvi Hirsch of Zidichav, the Sar HaZohar, the uncle of the Kamarna Rebbe, the uncle who raised the Kamarna Rebbe, one of the biggest tzaddikim and talmidim of the Baal Shem Tov, especially when it came to Inyane Kabbalah and the Zohar HaKadosh, used to want 3-year-olds to be walking around the street proficient in Zohar and Kitvei Arizal. And somebody famously came to the Zidichaver once and they said, Rebbe, we respect you, but don't we know that you can't learn Pnimiyas HaTorah until you're Tahor and Kadosh? So how could you be announcing that everybody should be learning Pnimiyas HaTorah? And the Zidichaver answered incredulously, he said, yes, I understand, but how can you become Tahor and Kadosh without learning Pnimiyas HaTorah? Sure, Tahara is a prerequisite for Pnimiyas HaTorah, but Pnimiyas HaTorah is also a prerequisite for Tahara, and a person has to throw themselves into the Or, and then Memela, the darkness, will start slowly but surely slipping away. And the Rebbe continues and he says as follows. The path of the Bali Musar, that the path of the Bali Musar was that the essential avoida that a person needed to engage in this world was to remove themselves from bad and to destroy all negative characteristics and to remove themselves from any temptations and to create tshuva for everything in their lives. And this is the derech of Beis Shammai, who says that the essential focus should be on removing things, making it less, take away the negativity. Kepare hachag, like the halacha of Beis Shammai, the shita of Beis Shammai says that the cheshbon that they make to teach us to light 8 candles and then 7 candles and then 6, which is Paisech v'hoilech, goes keneged the 70 parim that are brought on Sukkot, keneged the Umas Ha'olam, and the Umas Ha'olam represent those negative midos ra'os. So Beis Shammai's entire focus in Avodas Hashem was much more about get rid of the bad and only then can you do good. Ha'poiskim v'hoilchem v'chulei. And diminishing the negativity in our lives. But nevertheless, Ibizman, Habal Shem Tov, Kodem Zman Habal Shem Tov, before the time of the Baal Shem Tov, there were Osek and Tainos and Sigufim L'chapar Lavonos. That was the Mahalach. You had to fast. You had to engage in Tikunei HaNefesh to alleviate oneself from the burdens. You see this in the Arizal as well, in the Mekubalim. Masha'ein came there, Habal Shem Tov HaKadosh v'Talmidav Zchus Yibgan Aleinu, which is not the case with regards to the light of the Baal Shem Tov, which is the light of Chanukah and his students. Shabitel derech hasigufim v'atainios, for they negated the pathway of suffering for the sake of avodas Hashem or breaking the self. Ella shehinhigu leilech b'derech deme'at min ha'or doiche harbe min ha'choshech. But rather they chose to follow the path of the Baal HaTanya, the Baal HaSimcha of Yud Tes Kislev, which is the Hakdama to Pnimiyas HaTorah and Chanukah, who taught us that a little bit of the light dispels a lot of the darkness. And the main thing that we have to do is focus on the light. Is sur meira, ignore the bad, va'aseh tov. She'ikar hadagesh v'es askus giyeh bi'inyan aseh tov. That the main essential focus of a person's life when they deal with themselves, when they deal with another person, when they look at themselves, should always be focused on the Aseh Tov. Hainu la'asok be'nyane yichud Hashem va'avaso. To always find the capacity to uncover the unity of HaKadosh Baruch Hu and to uncover the undying love that we have engraved within each and every one of our hearts in the most irreducible way, the unerasable way. the love for HaKadosh Baruch Hu that flames forth from our hearts, v'dveikus b'Hashem Yisparach, and to focus on connecting to HaKadosh Baruch Hu wherever we may find ourselves, however we may find ourselves. U'letameitz b'tfila b'kavanu b'Torah lishma, and to put all of our effort into davening with kavana, into learning Torah for the proper reasons, laharbos ba'avodas Hashem, b'simcha b'skashrus l'tzadikim v'chulei, to spend all of our energy focusing on pathways to come closer to HaKadosh Baruch Hu, to connect to the tzaddikim, ad shahara yipol me'alav, until the negativity falls away on its own, like the Degel Machane Ephraim points out in Parshas Nitzavim, and the Tzemach Tzedek of Vishnitz points out in Parshas Vayechi, and the Chiddush Yarim points out on this pasuk as well, that Sur Me'ra doesn't mean get rid of the Ra, but rather ignore the Ra, to turn your eyes away from it. And this is the pathway of Beis Hillel, shemoisif v'hoilech or, that just adds more and more light. There's darkness, okay, more light, more light, more light, more light. And in that way, the darkness and the negativity will fall away on its own. In terms of Avodas Hashem, in terms of what we have to focus on during the days of Chanukah in the light of the tzaddikim, is that when a person looks at themselves honestly, especially in the lights of the candles, which forces a person to look at the emes da'amiso of themselves, we can't be caught up in that negative self-perception. We can't be too caught up in looking negatively on ourselves and feeling broken about what we don't do, but rather we have to be moisif v'hoilech. A person has to always add just a little bit more in Avodas Hashem, and to believe in the little bit, and to believe that the tiny little bit that I do, it is irrespective of the negativity that I'm still dirty with. My mitzvos are still mitzvos. My Torah is still Torah. My emunah is still emunah. My bitachon is still bitachon. Sure, I have to figure out a way to let go of those things, but be'ezras Hashem, by focusing on more and more light in a person's life, as memela, the darkness will fall away, in line with the tzaddikim who say that just a little bit of light will come and dispel a lot of darkness, be'ezras Hashem.